I don't buy that. Like, but that there's like, this is where I want Jonathan to like just.
How long
I
was games in
appreciate this
development?
a lot. It's a bit scary to me if this is the thought process.
No, that's the kind of thing that I do actually like doing that kind of stuff.
Yes. Are we the same person?
Million
Hopefully there's gonna be some places where we can add some commentary. I just changed my mouse pad myself to this one. Path of Exile 2.
Let's go to question 3, a really important question. Could you beat Chris Wilson in a fist fight?
No. Here's the thing. Chris, when he was younger, did martial arts.
Oh,
so
okay.
that's definitely went into his favor. He's definitely got that on me. I've never done anything like that.
Okay.
He also
He's-
goes to the gym now very frequently.
Oh, it's Chris Hench. Next time we see him, Chris is
Nice.
just massive and buff.
Good on, Chris.
There's actually just an eye to know when things are wrong, and this is a thing that is one of the hardest skills to develop and one of the most important skills to develop, because if you can see what's wrong, then you can take stuff that other people have made and make it good. And I think that that's actually really, really important, just by removing all the bad. And so that's a quite an important thing. But
That's a
one,
very
kind of horrible
interesting
thing about it
statement
is that it
given
means that when you play
POE1
every
right
other
now.
game- and so I think that we did like an event recently, and I think that the people who played the game did mostly get a pretty good, like, favorable impression of the kind of thing that we're doing. But it's certainly the case that if you just tell people, like, here's the kind of changes we have to make the game good, they don't necessarily sound like the kind of things that a PoE1 player immediately is like, oh yeah, that's the great thing. I mean, we can obviously present certain features, right? We can do that kind of thing, but it's like the big kind of like thing that everyone's like, oh, you're slowing the game down. That's like a huge thing that people often talk about.
Slow down, at least from a fresh start perspective, if not across the board. But okay, so there's a lot of things going on here. So the whole notion of slowing the game down when you showed campaign footage is a bit hilarious to me, because the game was, the more we played it, the more we sped up naturally. Okay, so the access to, there's not an access to Quicksilver, movement speed and such is a little bit more scarce. So in that sense, sure. When you look at people starting out in PoE1, they're not particularly fast. So this is all, like, when you're told PoE2 is slower compared to PoE1, you can't look at early PoE2 gameplay and compare it to like end game PoE, or you can't look at early PoE2 gameplay versus end game PoE1 gameplay and say these are not the same and complain about it, because obviously they can't be the same, right? You're comparing two different game states at two different times with different levels of experience.
Chris was the one who was like, here's a game that we can make that's going to be extremely successful. And I was like, you know what? I mean, certainly I am a big fan of Diablo 2, but if you were to ask me what my favorite games were at that time, it wasn't at the top of the list, surprisingly.
What was?
Yeah, that's what I know.
Probably Half-Life at the time.
Choice?
Pog.
I would say, or maybe StarCraft.
Pog.
I mean, these
Again,
are just like
good
late
choice.
90s bangers, right? Like, they're just
These were my favorite
that
games as well.
that everyone loved. But like, those are two. Final Fantasy VII as well, probably. But yeah, I mean, it kind of breaks a little bit of the sort of design that you want to try and do, because you want that difficulty scale somewhat linearly. But what we've ended up with is this weird knee in the curve, where like the game goes from like kind of a.
Did he just say he wants that to scale linearly? I don't buy that. Like, but that there's like okay.
Relatively.
For me, there were those two kind of casual moments in the Path of Exile 1 narrative where the first one is you fight Kitava, and the second one is you effectively kill Kitava, and you lose 25% of your resistances kind of permanently. Do you think that is a smooth moment of difficulty, or do you think there's a way that you can do that better?
But I would say that the intention behind this is not so much to say to the player, hey, you're going into endgame, now I'm going to screw you. The intention is more around, we need to solve this problem with increasing stats, and we need some good way to deliver that. Where are we going to do it?
I actually think that the resistance penalty that is accrued on the player on beating the campaign and stepping into white maps is probably a bad one, because something very specific happens. You go from essentially being on a journey to equip your character to get ready to the final battle and step into, say, the ground level of mapping. And while doing that, you are very focused on fixing all your gear pieces so you can take on this thing. But it's only to take on the main bad guy of the 10x, like the Kitava at the end, only to be faced with a second round of punch in the face of, well, there are actually two things you should have thought of, which was first to beat the guy, get ready for the final battle, and then the reward for the final battle is that now you need to farm this new content, and all that work you had is null and void, and you need to redo your entire gear set to essentially bump up. Because the way the PoE designed is that baseline content, you are expected to have 75. Anything less, and it sucks. Now, I think where they should probably accrue some penalty is going into yellow and red maps. So let's say that you enter red maps. This piece of content lowers your resist by 15. And then red maps, it does it again. So like minus 15 on yellow, minus 15 on red. And you can see it before you go in. And the thing here I think would be good is the fact that you actually have a place where your character belongs. Because the thing is, once you kill Kitava, your character doesn't really belong in Aqueduct anymore. This is like, it's like an old way of playing the game where, especially for PoE these days, is that farming an Aqueduct or a dried lake or whatever was fine because there wasn't that much of a difference from maps. But maps are like this whole other thing you are expected to go into now. And I don't think it's very natural for the player to go back to finding a space in previous act content that doesn't really feel... You're supposed to go to the map next. You're supposed to be led on through the story. The Kitava place of adding this difficulty is the wrong place in current PoE.
There are so many implications at this point to change anything. Like, you change anything and there are like 10 other things that break. And it's like, you know, holy crap, like, you know, just the amount of stuff that... It would be literally impossible to fully QA this game, to fully know the repercussion of every single change we make. Yeah, it's honestly terrifying. And then you look at like the number of sort of economic exploits that came out of the stuff we did in the last league. Okay. Like a lot.
You mean this league?
A lot of that stuff was just not predictable. Like, you need the hundreds of thousands of players to find this stuff, and it's because there are stats that everyone's forgotten about. Like, you know, that there are mechanics that exist that no one even remembered that can be used as part of interaction with something. Yeah, like
I gotta say, this right here, like the whole, like, we couldn't, I don't know, man. I do not believe that it can be this difficult to like plot in some like the expected extremes that people will go to and see, does this break the game? Yes, no. And there's obviously stuff like the abyssal strat. That one I can see going through the cracks. And certain other things where like mechanical interactions between like the lantern versus this can be hard to spot. You know, it's also up to GGG to make sure that whenever we layer 3 different new mechanics on top of each other, like that's on them. It can't be like, oh, we couldn't have expected this. Yeah, but you didn't have to do three mechanics that interact in this certain way where you have the ability to change the monster, grant them a huge buff, and stack it with a whole new scarab system at the same time. I'm sorry, but like, you created that your own problem, and you created as something that is unQAable. That is not because the game is overly complex. It's because you chose to throw things together that create these like incredibly complex scenarios where you don't have the time because you're creating 2 games at the same time, or you're at a point where the game is just overly complex, and this is just, why would you do that? That just seems crazy. There's an expectation of a certain quality of a game when you enter it through multiple leagues, and when they start doing what they've been doing in the last couple leagues, it's unfun to be a part of. Call Mark, he's crying. No, because Mark is like a fantastic dev. I've never had a conversation with Mark where he isn't like, where he doesn't showcase an incredible amount of game knowledge and an understanding of how a game needs to be, you know, run from a dev point of view. However, it's more like a philosophy thing, and it's a company development philosophy thing that's like doing this. It's not any individual. They have incredibly talented individuals, but a lot of this stuff is something that they've just kind of allowed themselves to do. And it's like, it's kind of, I think it's baked in kind of like their philosophy of game design at the studio, that this is just how it is. And I'm like, but I think it's bad that it is that way. Hopefully, going forward with Mark at the helm now, more Mark at the helm of PoE1, it'll be a rough ride for a while until they kind of settle on what is the game actually.
That's right. It was someone from Tencent, actually, who was playing the game. They fought against the second boss, the Devourer, and they said it was they died to it. And now, what I expect now that so we've got checkpoints in the game now. We didn't before, so you know when you die to the boss, you just respawn right in front of it. You just play it again very quickly.
Okay.
And the expectation when you die, for me, is that you try again. And maybe 2 more times, and then you beat it, right? Because your skills improve.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a problem here, is that when you're he's talking about the Devourer, and I think the Devourer is like one of the places where the player is actually faced with a problem that's bad in here, because the thing that happens in PoE2 is that you are put at a respawn point next to the Devourer, and so people will keep trying on this side boss to keep killing it because they're under the expectation that this is the correct thing to do, and not to go back and maybe try something else. You're not made very specifically aware that you're fighting a side boss. You think this is the correct thing to do. And people did not like this at the event either. Some people actually just kind of got up and walked away because they couldn't get past it, because it was a very difficult fight, and they just kind of ended up there as the first thing they did. So I think there's a bit of a communication problem here, and like, what is side content, what is the main storyline, and what should you progress towards, and how do you actually improve your character? Because there are times in PoE where you should absolutely, it's like, oh, I'm fighting this big boss now, and I should improve my character before I move on. So I should go back and farm a little bit, go to another zone. It's something you do that in PoE1 as well. Maybe not a lot, but people will over farm a little bit because they feel like their character is too weak to continue.
Because you learn what to do. It's repetition. It's very similar to Elden Ring again. The respawn point is almost right outside the boss, because the challenge, the fun bit of the game, is the boss, not getting to the boss.
Right. But this person's expectation was, I die to the boss, so therefore I'm going to go grind some more monsters to get more power.
And that is the ARPG mindset. It's exactly what I explained, right? Okay, and so now this is important. The way that you scale damage and you scale your character in PoE, especially in the early stages, is incredibly volatile. If you don't have the correct weapon before a boss fight, if you're a melee character, you're going to do all damage. In PoE2, it's a war of attrition, okay? PoE2 is a war of attrition against your healing potions, especially if you're slightly less skillful and you're not avoiding everything, you will run out of potions. The potion versus this is why we need to have static potion gains for everyone at every level of the game, because you might not be able to, like, you need to have some way of continuously, if the fight turns long because you're not strong enough, you need to, okay, now I have to play well for a while to regain some potion charges and then can re-engage if you are under geared. Right? That needs to at least be an option. If you go in and you have like a driftwood club, but you're supposed to have like the second tier two-hander by that point to really engage with this fight, because whoever designed it knows that that's what you're supposed to have. So they gear up like not with any good rolls, but they just have the right base item with maybe 1 damage roll. A lot of the time, players will face things in the game where you haven't reached the gear progression of where you're supposed to be, and therefore you're going to do significantly less damage. You're not as skillful as someone else, and so you're going to start taking too much time. You're going to lose all your potions before you will ever beat this thing. Like, with the way they're designing the game, you need to allow the player to build up character power before they go again, or you need to essentially lower the curve in terms of item power and player power to be more linear, so there's very little variation. But that goes against itemization in PoE, so they need to make a choice. They absolutely need to make a choice in how do they want to design the game. And this is a huge, design choice that needs to be solved and thought about very carefully. I think this is it's one of the things, but they haven't nailed this yet.
We're looking at, okay, so, you know, Okay, here is a random feature that Path of Exile 2 will have that's not in the game right now, but we're blatantly stealing. Which is that, so I've always been stringently against damage numbers in video games. I just don't. I mean, I know there are people who love damage numbers, and that's like a huge thing for them. Like,
I'm actually happy
I've
that
always
he's
been of the
stringently
opinion
against
they
it.
break the immersion, and you end up, that's what
Yeah.
you end up looking at, and so I don't really love them. And the other day, someone was like, "Can we do damage numbers like Elden Ring?" I'm like, "What? Elden Ring has damage numbers? What are you talking about?" And then like, yeah, the damage numbers in Elden Ring, and I'm like, "Hang on a minute." And then they showed me a video, and I'm like, hang on. So there's a little number that appears at the top right of health bars that are the damage numbers. And I'm like, my goodness, this is a way to, I didn't even notice that was there. This is a way that we can do damage numbers that isn't going to break any of the problems we have. So I'm just gonna shamelessly rip that off. Path of Exile 2 will have damage numbers just like they are in Elden Ring.
The interview's worth it. We got information. Yeah. Everyone in the chat right now, we've got information. This is good.
So we absolutely do that. Yeah. Their argument was, okay, like, are you a loot game or are you an action game? And I was kind of like, well, we're both. But they said, well, if you're a loot game, then you should be able to just go and grind some loot and then use that as a way to get past a boss rather than having to get good at action. And that was their view of that. And I don't know if I fully agree with this, because to me, I feel like you need to have some.
But you can't have this. This is where you cannot have the game be itemized in the way it is right now, where the potential of power on loot is so high, and then say, I don't know if I agree with this. That's crazy to me, because it's the backbone of the entirety of PoE, and I do not understand how you can't see it. Okay. This is where I want Jonathan to like just he needs to kind of have some conversations with some people on this. I don't know. It's a bit scary to me if this is the thought process right here.
And so the question is, for the second boss of the game, should a player be able to just go grind some monsters for a while?
If the player is able to do that and it's the second boss of the game, you're effectively teaching the player that they can trivialize all the mechanics of the game by simply having a bigger number than the game wants you to have.
Correct, which is a bit of a tricky one. So yeah, I'm actually not sure what entirely to do about that.
Again, the way it's, I gotta say, like, the item design of PoE 1 and PoE 2 needs to be heavily looked at in terms of like power acquisition through gear, and what does that look like? Especially when you have, like, once you get to the next tier of a weapon, like, you can literally, like, if you get lucky, you just trivialize everything for a long time. If you get unlucky, you just get bombed for a long time. It's way too volatile. It was, again, back to, like, PoE 1 racing, when they wanted to have, because they had racing, they wanted the game to be action and competitive and all these things. So we had to introduce recipes so that we essentially skewed the volatility of item acquisition. It was the only way to have caster and weapon style characters be even remotely competitive. It's why whenever they did the racing content back in the day, where they had more curated content, they would add specific items to craft with, but not only that, and a lot of it to essentially break the curve, but they also added unique weapons at the start that gave you a certain level of power for you to progress with.
Lowest possible gear, lowest possible numbers, lowest possible damage, lowest possible health. Very few people are going to watch Path of Exile beaten by being massively overpowered and just walking through all the bosses. I mean...
Are you kidding me? What? That is literally the opposite of what happens. Except on, like, the very fringe case. There's only one time where the opposite kind of is true. Well, there's a couple places where the opposite is true. It was like Ty doing his level 26 Uber Elder or whatever. Or like Ben doing his one link thing. But Ben had so much gear otherwise, like, he was very well geared that he could essentially take on it with just one link in one of the races. I forget what it was, but it still required a massive amount of gear to even compete. Like this, like on hardcore, you can't do things naked. It doesn't, because you can't get there. And if you do things naked, it's like nobody cares at that point, because it's like a softcore thing, and like if you did it on softcore, like, oh, okay, well, I mean, you could care. Like, there are things where it's like, it's a gimmick. People want to be overpowered. It's an ARPG.
Well, you say that, and yet if you look at all of the top Twitch streams, right?
Oh yeah, they're incredible.
Okay, so he is aware, Mark. That's good.
Standing there and doing all that cool
Thank
stuff,
God.
which will happen.
Brutally overscoped. I mean, it's actually absurd how many monsters got made. While it's actually crazy. Like, I mean, I've told people numbers of, like, you know, how many monsters and bosses and stuff there are, but it's just like it's actually ridiculous.
I love the fact that they're adding this many monsters and bosses. Personally,
it's actually scary the degree to which, like, when I actually look at how long
I
this game's in
appreciate this a
development,
lot.
What systems have you removed from Path of Exile 2, either bringing them over from 1, or you spent time developing them and then had a bit of self-reflection and said, you know what, this doesn't need to be here? Because if God of War, the reboot, was so good because it removed all the superfluous stuff, give us an example of when you've done that.
Ooh.
It's
They're not good at that.
hard to exactly come up with something that is a nice, tight package to say that for, because it really is like an evolution that continues along a lot of ways.
True.
But, I mean,
Grant him that.
there's a lot of stuff we haven't brought over yet, and that doesn't really count yet. Because
they want to bring everything over.
Like that, but also was something that a lot of people on the team were very skeptical about, and mostly because they were very worried about the idea.
I hope that they change the game to accommodate WASD.
Control scheme versus another would get an advantage over it.
That's my hope, because it's really good.
Just something that feels like it's important, but actually I believe isn't.
I think that's the evolution of POE2.
And certainly, God, I'm terrible with names. What's that? The yellow star that goes beneath your feet that makes you resistant to damage.
People in the chat will know what you're on about.
Yeah, people know what I'm talking about. That thing, right? So, for example, like, that's important to have in your character somewhere. There's a thing like that. If you don't have it, then your defense is
I have 1,000 people saying fortify right now, so I'm assuming it's
fortify. That's the one. Fortify. Yeah. By the way, just as a thing to know about me, I'm terrible with names. Like just completely. In fact,
so Jonathan, continue telling us about how melee class is going to work in Path of Exile 2 and how it's going to be good.
All right. So the next one.
Like in PoE1, they just need to stop treating, like, they need to just accept the fact that PoE1 plays in a certain way, and just be like, this is, I don't know. I feel like it's just, I don't know. Obviously, it's not easy, but like you either have, you need to make things more distinct. You have totem gameplay, you have melee gameplay, you have like X gameplay, Y gameplay, and then they just need to actually bump numbers to a certain degree. Okay, what they do in PoE1 that up melee all the time is that they overcomplicate it. They overcomplicate the things. They make way too many multipliers. Just focus on making the individual skills good and try to call away the things that multiply the damage too much, like the totems. Make totems not required, make the individual skills better, and have it more of a one skill, one build kind of deal. Because that's why every other skill feels good, because it's one skill, one build. Sometimes you have two skills, one build, but those are like packages, and you can have packages in melee as well, but then you design around the package. It's very difficult to like solve it right here, but I think they need to uncomplicate it to begin with. The thing that really sucks in PoE is often strike skills, because strike skills lock you in on a target in a different way. They often lock you in for longer periods of time. Melee often has like the harder hitting things that have a longer attack time, which punishes the wanting to move, because it's often where you feel locked in more at the time. The reason why slams were good for melee was that you could just slam adjacent to the boss and you still hit. That was nice. It's why people actually do play cleave, because it has a reasonable amount of AoE. It has a reasonable amount of distance. Strike skills, however, there were like a couple types of strike skills people like to play, which were the overlapping strike skills, where I have the ancestral strike happening, and then I am a little bit away, having some semblance of distance. The moment they started taking that away, where you have to like, the way to really play now is to actually just be on the boss and straight on him. That's where some of the problems are actually occurring. Strike range should just be more forgiving to the player, for instance. I think a lot of the strike skills just need to be way more forgiving, and they need to stop being so adamant about, you know, it can look a little jank. Melee in PoE is already jank. You're not going to get this perfect. Accommodate the player a little bit more versus the vision of what melee is supposed to be, and work around it that way, because I think that ends up being better for the game as a whole, like PoE1.
But if I write an essay about why the changes are happening and convince people that the change we're making is actually good, then there are people who would not have had fun before who are having fun now. So therefore, community communication is game design. The fun that they experience in the game is affected by the decisions we make as far as communicating with the community. So therefore, we should treat that as a game designer part of the process.
Which means that what he's effectively saying is that the FOMO, with their balancing right now, is game design. So it's on them.
All Path of Exile 2 are going to throw these big events. Yes, people at the events are going to love it, but we need to make sure the players just playing it at home love it just as much. And one of the best ways to do that is outreach from you guys to the players. Exactly what we're doing now. This is part of the process.
Like, I will actually say I'm very happy that I am part of the PR, like I am part of the promotional package for PoE2. I was invited to the event, I put on content, and I have given feedback. The thing is, my feedback, I have not, the only thing that they have essentially, that has been curated to some extent, was the don't showcase things that might be glitchy, that might be due to the version we were given in LA, for instance, right? There are some glitches, some crashes, things are happening, that kind of thing. Don't draw attention to that. It's not important, and I don't think it's important either, because it's like a demo, alpha, beta, whatever. It's a non-complete version that will have some errors where it's like, I'd rather get to experience more of the game and have something. These are things I believe that they're gonna fix anyways, right? It's a work in progress, and so we don't need to draw attention to these. But what we do need to draw attention to is like a gameplay, economy, itemization, and all these things. And at no point have I been instructed to say anything in any way. It's all been like, I can say whatever I want. I've been able to give them any kind of feedback. It can be scary, but I've given very critical feedback over the years, and I've never felt that I've been unable to continue to do so. A lot of the people in the PoE community, in the conversation between PoE1 and PoE2, there's a lot of streamers who are trying to force the game into a PoE1 direction, and they're staunch in their disagreement with with GGG in terms of PoE2. They want to turn PoE2 into PoE1. They actually want the opposite. They're more rigid. They're less willing to actually accept the change. Like, this has happened a lot. And they would even go, like, I would even go so far, like, I've heard a lot of people be like, well, I mean, when PoE2 flops, which is probably gonna do, I'll just keep playing PoE1, and hopefully they're just gonna put all their time into PoE1 again, so we can just keep playing that. A lot of creators think this way, that PoE2 will inevitably just suck and they will just go back to playing PoE1. So I mean, it's like, but everyone has their their opinion on this. But that doesn't mean you can't be I mean, that's just what they think based on, you know, what they think is a good game. That doesn't mean that they're not being objective.
So yeah, I was playing that game. I mean, people talk about as well about the okay, so the thing that people did like, and the thing that generally was very well received in that game, was the shipbuilding system. So that's the kind of thing that I do actually like, doing that kind of stuff. I'm a fan of this kind of stuff.
Dude,
so,
I'm like,
that isn't, and this is probably a very easy answer, because this is.
Are we the same person?
A million people. We kind of had this idea of like slowly opening up, and the idea was that you could see adjacent chunks and what the conditions were that would unlock them, and then we even thought maybe what you could do is have it so that once a chunk was unlocked on one character, that it's unlocked for all your characters, so that you've kind of got this idea.
I kind of like the idea,
unlocking
though,
the whole tree for your account or something like that.
I mean,
we just had these like vague ideas.
That's really close to mastery.
Okay, so this is actually a fantastic idea for a roguelike game, where you don't know what you're turning into, where there's some kind of like, you evolve your character over time, but it's like there's kind of a, you don't know what's happening and what's gonna happen, and it could be based on your choices. It could be, it sounds like, I like the idea, and it could be a very involved and a very complex thing, but it would only work if each iteration of what you're doing is new and different, and you're not trying to make the same characters over and over again. Like, it's not for PoE, because PoE require, like, PoE is a game where you're making certain characters, right? But in a roguelike game, you would play through and you would end up with a character you couldn't expect. It would be an amazing roguelike mechanic. I really like the idea, actually. I think it's a great idea. I would love to see a game that did it.
The one that is me and will be new in PoE2 that I'm actually very proud of is the fact that now you can see the difference to your character from hovering over any skill in PoE2. So you can press shift and you'll get here's the stat changes that will result, and specifically here are the DPS differences that will result in all of your skills from allocating the skill point. So that will actually, I think, aid a lot of people.
Jonathan, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for chatting to me.
No problem. Thanks, Frank. It was an excellent chat.
I think there's some bits there that could be made into a video. This only took 4 hours. It wasn't too bad. It's a good little interview.